Welcome to the Crime Dawg Podcast with your host and content creator, Johnny FIORICA, who claims to be so athletic, yet he broke both wrists at the same time when he was 15. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Hello, folks. Johnny FIORICA. I am your host and content creator for the Crime Dawg Podcast. 30-year retired veteran with the Rochester Police Department. Sitting alongside me today is my trusted co-host, David Simpson. He's a legendary street cop, undercover cop, SWAT cop, and a homicide detective after serving 20-plus years with the department, also retired. David, welcome to the pod.
Happy to be here. It's a must today.
It's definitely a must. And I'll tell everybody in our audience knows by now, Jason Blanchard, who is our second co-host, and he makes the tripod or the third person on our CDP broadcast here. He's not sitting in on this one because he's active law enforcement at the Rochester Police Department. And when he's active law enforcement and we talk about current incidents that directly affect the Rochester Police Department, Jay sits out on these instances so as not to have any kind of conflict of interest. David, as a podcast, we were talking about the things that we got to discuss. We were talking about the violence that's going on in the Rochester community, in Rochester, New York, which is pretty much indicative across the nation. However, we're going to focus specifically, which we do sometimes, but this is the podcast. We got to talk about the violence that happened over the weekend from Friday, July 26th to Sunday, July 29th. And I'm just going to be looking down a lot. I know I don't do that frequently, but I have text messages, I have emails, I have papers in front of me.
A lot of information coming in.
Yeah, there's a ton of information coming in through a lot of trusted sources, and I don't want to mess it up. But what's ridiculous is we have what appears to be, starting with murders, we have possibly, there was 5 murders in 4 incidents, and I just want to double check. However, sources close to our camp say there may be 6 murders and 5 incidents within the next couple days or so. So there might be someone that's hanging on life support or something, but that's just the murders. And then the violence totals from the time period from the Friday to Sunday, the weekend that just passed, because today is July 30th, we look at, there was 4 robberies, 9 assaults, 4 shots fired, multiple shooting victims. And as I look at my paper, things that didn't even hit the media, I don't think, assault, second stabbing on the west side of the city. There was obviously the homicide of Maplewood that we're going to get into. There was a prohibited use of a firearm over on East Avenue, which we'll talk about too. The shots fired over in the Bar District. There was a reckless endangerment first, where people were shot at, or a vehicle was shot up over on Flint Street. There was a street robbery on Goodman. There was another assault, second stabbing, another one on the west side, another assault, second stabbing on the east side, which was a cutting and a beating.
But violence isn't up, Johnny. Violence isn't up.
Yeah, right. There's a home invasion on Meg Street. Another shoot up over near Alexander Street.
So in other words, Baghdad safer than Rochester.
Yeah, then there's a prohibited use. A prohibited use, folks, to explain it to you, the difference between a prohibited use of a weapon and a reckless endangerment means that there was no victim. So basically, you could stand outside if there's no one around that could be in possible danger, fire a gun in the air. That's what they call prohibited use of a weapon. If there's somebody where you shoot into a house or you shoot into the car and there's occupants of either, that's a reckless endangerment. Again, another stabbing on the east side, 2 stabbings on the east side, another beating on the east side. It's just odd and odd. I mean, I'm just reading paper after paper, and this is just in a weekend that just passed. It's crazy, David. What
So maybe explain,
happened.
Johnny, like what the nightly is for the laymen that don't,
Yeah. So I say that. So when you're a cop, you get emails and stuff, and there's what they call nightly summaries. There's nightly violent summaries. There's nightly incident summaries. One of the huge allies of the Rochester Police Department is MCAC, which is a Monroe County crime center that they literally pass out and disseminate information. They crunch all the numbers and they condense it so it's easier for us dumb cops to process every morning or once a week. And they're fantastic. Director Dave Phelps, personal friend of mine, him and his staff do an excellent job at MCAC. they're just phenomenal. They produce a lot of these reports, most of these reports for the department and also countywide throughout Monroe County. But they basically summarize all the crimes. They break them down. They give you the number of victims, who was the victims, and a summary of what happened. David, this violence is not shocking, but it's unprecedented.
Yeah. I mean, we've been banging the drum it seems so redundant, but we called that this was going to happen when bail reform and raise the age went into effect. We said it's going to start a trend that it's going to be a runaway train, and the train's off the tracks and it's rolling. This is something you are not getting back quickly. Violent criminals in the city of Rochester have zero fear of law enforcement, zero fear of any repercussions that might happen. There used to be a time, Johnny, and you can remember these days, where people would not carry guns on their person. It was very difficult to make a gun arrest maybe 15, 20 years ago. There was guns out there. The way they did it was they would stash guns. They'd put them in dope houses. They'd put them in backyards. They put them under porches. And that little bit of time break, not having it on your person, probably saved lives, okay? Because those quick reaction shootings, those quick reaction murders where it's just like totally emotional because you have a gun on you, didn't happen like it does now. Now everyone carries a gun. And the reason why that changed was raise the age and bail reform. Bail reform, these guys know, like the East Rochester incident with the carnival where the kid brought in a handgun. That was his, third or fourth gun incident he's had in the last couple of years. There's no deterrent because guys just don't get locked up. Before, it was like, if I get caught with a gun, oh shit, I'm done. That was it. You were done. Now it's not like that. The second fold is, these guys know if I don't want to carry a gun, my little brother's carrying a gun because they know the age. And they're putting these kids in a situation where they're holding the guns. So now I have a kid that's even more emotional and more apt to fly off the handle, the one holding the gun, because you've done raise the age, which made younger kids carry guns for people. And those are two main things that's going on. And we called it years ago, a couple years ago, and here we are.
Yeah, you're right, David. It's so funny when you talk. My head goes 100 miles an hour, almost like replaying movies in my head. You're right. Remember, we used to call them community guns. Yeah. So if we were targeting a group of guys, if there was a gang on Conkey Avenue or Joseph Avenue or Clinton Avenue or wherever it was, I just mentioned those streets because that's where I did most of my street time. There would be a community gun, right? So if there was a group of 3-4 houses where they hang out and they slung their dope, nobody would be holding a gun. There would be a gun or two guns, under a garbage can lid, 2 houses down. There would be a designated shooter. If something happened to drive by, they'd be told, okay, you got to go get the gun, put it on you, fire back, or hidden under a porch or duct taped somewhere. It was never on their person. But you're right. What they're doing to get around all the criminal justice reform that we've been talking about that's needed is, you're right. They give it to younger kids. Hey, hang on to this. Stand next to me. And you're 100% right. Totally disgusting.
Who could have seen that coming?
Yeah, who could have seen that coming, right? One of the things I want to say too is, this isn't Mayor Malik Evans's problem. Just because it's his city, it's not his problem. Just because he's the boss of the city, this is not Malik Evans's fault. This isn't Dave Smith's problem. Okay, this isn't the chief's problem. Okay, it's his problem to deal with, but it's not his fault. Everyone likes to point the fingers. What are you doing now? What's your game plan? What? I'm sorry. We talked about this off camera before we started, David. It's a culture thing, right? It's a culture thing where when we talk about it, Dave Smith's not going to go into these homes and rewind the clock and raise these kids for you who turn out 10 years later to act like they do in public or to make them tote a gun to shoot somebody. I mean, this is decades of non-parenting. There's no family structure. That's where the problem is. It isn't the mayor's fault that didn't happen. It isn't the chief's fault it didn't happen. It's not the cop's fault it didn't happen. It's actually the family unit that's responsible for making sure that you raise the children right so they grow up to be people that are productive members of society. You know what I'm saying? I love it when they say, what's the police department going to do about it? What do you mean, what am I going to do about it? I wasn't there to raise your kid. When you were letting him run the streets when he was 7 years old.
And there's nothing the police can do about it because no one goes to jail. So they can go and grab a guy with a gun, but he's going to be right back out on the street.
Right.
So there's not, the police aren't going to do anything other than clean up the bodies.
Right.
I mean, that's literally in essence what they're doing. They're doing crime reports and cleaning up the bodies, locking up bad guys so they don't hurt anyone. Those days are over, and it ended in Albany.
You know, the one thing that kind of spurred this podcast, and it started our multiple thousand text strings that we have for the Crime Dawg podcast between me, you, Jay Blanche, and our super producer, Danny Agnew. It was the 204 Maplewood Drive incident, the multiple mass shooting that happened over the weekend on Sunday, July 28th, around 6:20 p.m. And there was multiple people shot. I believe it's up to 9 now, with 2 dead. 7 are injured, 2 dead. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to is that this kind of what sparked this podcast. As we started talking about and having a dialogue, that's when we started to really reach out to our contacts and say, well, this wasn't the only thing that happened this weekend. And then we started getting the other instances of violence that I read off in the beginning of the podcast. But talking about the homicide, the mass shooting over, on Maplewood Drive and that little makeshift park that's on the west side of the city that borders the Genesee River, just over the 104 bridge when you're coming into the city from I-Town, from Irondequoit. It started off, and I could be wrong, and listen, we always say that, but it's my understanding from the flyers and what from people were saying on Twitter, they were saying that it started off as like a book giveaway, like a book bag giveaway for children for the upcoming school year. That is awesome. I love that idea. And I think it's so cool where some people organize, if that was it. I'm throwing my hands up and saying I'm not so sure if that, and I mean that, I'm not so sure if that was the premise of the get-together, but I will err on the side of caution and say that it was. And then apparently it morphed into that. Then it turned into some kind of barbecue. Then it turned into some kind of party. And then it turned into, international fight night. I mean, it was like disgusting, those videos that we saw on Twitter, right?
The shocking thing about the video is, again, the number of people you hear them saying, I have a gun, that aren't even involved in the shooting, really, and people running around and running from shots fired that have guns on them. Again, this is not that complicated. If people carry guns in group settings and there's fights and there's disagreements, the potential rises for those guns to be used. So, in those no deterrent for people not to carry guns, meaning they're not scared. They're not like, oh shit, if I get grabbed with this gun, excuse my language, I'm fucked. That day is over. That day is done. They don't care because they know they're not going to jail. They know nothing's going to happen to them. So they carry guns. When there's disagreements and there's disputes, the guns come out and bodies drop. Yeah. It's not complicated.
Yeah, and you actually pointed it out. You sent me a video from the twits where I think you sent it out, and you said, turn up the audio, and it was a kid who was being told by, it was a male and a female. The female, I think, was recording, and she says, get behind a tree, or get behind, like basically tell him to get behind cover. And he's like, no, I don't got it. I got my gun on me. I'm like, okay, buddy, that's
hope
great.
That stops
that's
a bullet.
Great. Yeah, I hope your gun stops the bullet is right. I mean, it's just unbelievable, that they talk like this. One of the things that we have seen, and people ask me about it. I was on a national broadcast. They brought me on yesterday to talk about some things. It is a loose, laid-back comedy podcast, but they actually talked about what happened over the weekend. They wanted to talk about and get my input from my experience, because they know that we have the Crime Dawg podcast. So I went to their studio, recorded it for an hour and a half. And one of the things that I talked about, they said, Johnny, what's changed? And I said, I'll tell you what's changed. In 2024, since 2020, basically, since all the criminal justice reform has happened, if the department found out about this incident, now I'm not so sure how the department responded, but I will tell you this. We're basically being reactive right now. In 2024, we're reactive. Because of bail reform, because you can't do it. We talk about it all the time, folks. Order maintenance crimes. Those are your disorderly conducts. When you see on social media, when you're all over the country, in Rochester, New York, you can't do it anymore because of bail reform. But if, for example, you have a disorderly conduct, that's when a person says, fuck you, officer, I ain't going anywhere. Come on, sir, get away. They're being disruptive. Back in the day, you could take that person to custody, detain them so they didn't incite everybody else around them, put them in a car, detain them, drive them away, take them to jail for the night. Okay, it was a minor crime. Okay, it was maybe a couple $100 bail, whatever it was. And of course, that's what people are bitching about. But I can't tell you how many riots that stopped by getting the agitator or agitators out of there. Okay, now what I told these guys in a podcast yesterday was when you have instances like these, and we found out, oh my God, it wasn't called a pop-up party back in the day, but a pop-up party like this was basically, in a public park. You don't need a permit. Everyone's just going there and gathering, which was fine. That's what the community is for. That's what these parks are for. But they're also there for everyone to act civil. But back in the day, if a cop drove by, which was highly probable there was, he'd get on the radio and be like, just so you guys know, there's 200 to 500 people in the park. 410, the guy that's in charge of the city when the chief's not there, especially on the weekends, that's what they call him, 410. Or if the chief's on duty, if it's during the week, they'd be like, hey, send some guys over there, show a presence. That presence was not to say don't barbecue. The presence was there so they could say, hey, we're here making sure that you're safe. We're not there to intimidate you and not to have fun, but we're making sure that the people that may have weapons here or that may want to be disruptive and may want to start a fight, we're here and we're ready to react. So they're almost not talking down, but almost in a way, they're babysitting an event like that to make sure they're being proactive back in the day, not reactive like it is today, but they're being proactive back then because we didn't have bail reform and the other bullshit criminal justice reform that's taken place, in a negative way for what's going on in police work today. And you would have these gatherings and they would go off in some instances without a hitch. You might have a little bit of skirmish over here or a skirmish over there, but it was nothing like what took place in Maplewood Park on Sunday at 6:20 p.m. A shootout, David?
Yeah. It doesn't take long for a cop to do a drive-by and assess whether some officers are needed to make sure nothing pops off. Like You take age into account, coupled with how much, alcohol being present. You ask a couple questions. Is it like one of the churches having something? Is it a family reunion? There's all ways to assess things. And all of a sudden, if you got people from both sides of the city, they're young people, alcohol's involved, there's a heightened potential for things to pop off. And that's when you have to react. If you go up there and it's a church gathering or it's a family reunion or something like that, you're not going to get involved. You're not going to be there. But this was an instance where you had people from all over the city all coming together. And right now that's a recipe for disaster in the city, and you have a lot of young people. Everyone's carrying guns. It appears, I drove by it, there's plenty of people were consuming alcohol, and carrying an illegal handgun is probably not a great idea. Mm-hmm. And, it did need maybe some babysitting, but,
yeah,
it's hard to do that when numbers are so low that you don't have enough cops to patrol the sections you have.
Well, let me just the last point I want to make about all the violence that went on over the weekend. And I got a text message from someone today say, hey, check this out. It was from the Twitters and Assemblyman Damon Meeks. I don't even know who this gentleman is. But Damon Meeks, there was someone that recorded him, addressing. He had, and I'm going to be full disclosure, for the video that I saw, there was some things that he said that were fantastic. There was some things that he said. He was very emotional. I get it. It's the community that you serve. I get it. There was some things that he said that were very positive. However, there was some things that he said that were opposite of positive. They were out of effing left field. Right,
but that's what he does. He's just inciting. He just is anti-police as there is.
Well, I mean, it's disgusting because the wound isn't even starting to heal yet. I mean, I mean, you can't do that as a politician, as an assemblyman. You can't go out there to incite a group of people. At first, I thought when they said to me, I'm like, oh, this isn't bad. His speech, this is, he's bringing his constituents together. He's talking. That's what leaders in the community do. That's great. And then it morphed into this kind of rah-rah BS speech that he's talking about. There was some anti-cop stuff in there. You know what I mean? There was some talk about oppression and this and that. It's like, now listen, if that's what he thinks, that's great. This is America. Say what you want to say. First Amendment, you were elected to do what you got to do. I get that and I respect that. However, don't do it when people's emotions are high. Don't do it, like I said, before the wounds have even started to heal yet. I mean, this mass shooting was only a couple days ago. This violence was only a few days ago. Today's only Tuesday. And it's like, now we're going to talk about what happened. Anything negative to come out of that, you have an opportunity as a leader in the community to incite people. And, he did talk about both some positive and negative interactions with cops, specifically the RPD, in different places in Rochester that he was visiting during the weekend of violence. So I will say that he did say some positive, some negative. And, even if it's positive, if it's positive or negative, now's not the time to bring up anything about the cops right now, only because if he has something to say, because tensions are so high, you're a leader. Meet with Dave Smith. Call Chief Smith. His door is always open. Meet with Malik Evans. Sit down and talk and say, hey, you know what, Chief? I was at the hospital. I got this guy's badge number. He was fantastic. Or I talked to this female over here at the hospital. She was great. Or I saw this person in the community over the weekend. They weren't so great. Okay. That's when you do it behind closed doors. That's when leaders get together and they problem solve. You don't do it when you have a group of people, wherever he was, with a microphone in front of his face. That's not the time to do it. But we know why people, when politicians, I say people, politicians do that. They do it because they want to incite whoever it is that they want to incite. But like I said, there was some things that he said that were fantastic and positive, and this other bullshit that he was spewing was not needed at this time.
Yeah, well, I mean,
par for the course, right, David?
I don't have a lot to say on that topic, but the one thing I will say is that some of the other politicians in town talking about addressing some of the root causes of poverty and root causes of family structure that might need to be addressed. And, like you even said, that the culture, I think that's, all stuff that's great and that should be addressed. However, there's a key point here, and this comes from someone or both of us that are experts in dealing with violent crime. We spent our whole careers. We were on the violent crime team. I was on the SWAT team. I did homicide. We dealt with the drug world. We are experts on violent crime. So those things that you mentioned, or those politicians mentioned, are great. However, those things take years or a generation to see come to fruition. We have a violence problem now. We have bodies dropping now, and we need that addressed yesterday. And those things that they're talking about are totally irrelevant to now. Those are things you can implement, and it's going to take years even to get them implemented. Mm-hmm. But stopping violent crime can happen now. These people could call Sheriff Bachelor. They could call Chief Smith. They could go back to Albany. They could sit down. They could tweak bail reform. They could tweak raise the age. Those are things that could immediately happen that could directly affect the violence in Rochester. Yeah. They could stop the negative narrative about policing, which would encourage more proactive policing and encourage officers to go out there and be more aggressive, in which you have to be to get violent criminals off the street. You can't be non-aggressive and get violent criminals off the street. Doesn't happen. This isn't utopia. Aggression comes with some bad-looking things, but to get bad guys off the street, sometimes you got to fight and chase, and maybe even get in a shootout with them. But that's what the job is.
Yeah, you make some good points, and when you talk about the negative rhetoric that comes out of some of these politicians' mouth, they got what they wanted, right, David? They got what they wanted after 2020. The old defund the police. You know what they got? They got less cops on the street. And then the cops that are there, because you want to go after them so much, you got cops not being proactive anymore. You got them being reactive, which is not good for the community. 100%. I say some, not all, but some. Right. that are being reactive. And then that affects the famous Mrs. Johnson on Conkey Avenue, who then is now the victim of crimes because our guys are not being proactive out there. And rightfully so, because they're getting the shit kicked out of them all over social media, all the rhetoric that's being said about them. So yeah, you're right. And then it reflects in what? Like the podcast that we dropped a couple weeks ago with our recruitment people, Michelle Calderon and Sergeant Justin Collins. You know, it affects our recruitment. What did you sent me a text today about Erie County, didn't you?
Yeah, Erie County says that applications for police officer positions in Erie County since 2016 are down 80%.
Down 80%.
80%.
Oh, God, 8 years. 80% in 8 years. You have people that don't want to be cops because they're not going to be treated like punching bags. You know, and then when you don't want cops, you don't want people. That happens, you're having people that are your qualified people stay away from a profession that they'd be very good at and they'd be great ambassadors to the community. But instead, what happens is you end up getting people that, in some instances, mainly most instances, that normally wouldn't have gotten hired. When I say back in the day, years ago, but because the standards are so low now you're hiring a lesser qualified person.
Well, I mean, we talk about all the time that proactive policing's dead. The days of the street cop have been killed off. I mean, these guys aren't allowed, and girls aren't allowed to do what you and I did 15 years ago. Now, there's probably some good things that come from that, maybe, you know, but I feel like, again, like most things, there's a middle of the road there that could be a compromise that could be reached where you didn't just totally castrate police officers and let everyone in the city walk around with a handgun in their waistband. And you also don't turn them loose to, you know, kick in every door and drag people out of their houses either. I think there's some middle of the road there, but it doesn't seem like anyone wants to find that.
No, David, you're right. And like you said, we had to do this podcast today. Folks, thanks for listening to us discuss what happened over the weekend in Rochester, New York, the violence summary that we gave you on the last 30 minutes or so. If you like this episode, that's awesome. Check out our YouTube channel at Crime Dawg Podcast. Go there, click on the library of episodes that we have, click like and subscribe. Subscribing to our podcast on YouTube will allow you to get video notifications when we drop new stuff. If you want to check out our website, you can go to thecrimedogpodcast.com, where we also have a library of our videos that will then direct you to our YouTube page. But thanks for listening to this podcast. We hope you tune in for future episodes. But like my brother-in-law Frankie Grassi says, if you can't make it, who cares?